Gene, it's great to see you again today.
James, likewise. Good afternoon. How are
Doing
you?
well. So today we wanted to talk about the two guides, Communicate and Code and Integrate Continuously, which, as per our previous video, if you look at the complete picture, this relates to you'll see the guide which comes from the third book, as well as the experiments which come from the first and second book. So with that in mind, Gene, can you please talk a little bit about Communicate and Code as well as integrating continuously?
Sure. So communication and code. So I'll make a step back just for a few seconds, and we'll share with you what has been shared with me many times by developers, by teams, that communication in general has been a huge overhead and a huge problem for them. Why? Because it's just so much of it, and it seems like there are meetings on top of meetings, and there are status meetings and status calls and checkpoints, and there's a lot of redundancy, and there's a lot of waste that's produced by this redundancy. Also, sometimes I get these silly, almost borderline naive questions. How do we communicate with each other? How do I let another developer know that I need to make him or her do something for me? You can probably call that person, right, or I am. But even better would be if you can communicate through clean code. And there are some great tools and techniques to make this happen. In fact, there was a whole series that I strongly recommend by Uncle Bob Martin, one of the co-founders of Agile Manifesto, Clean Coders. A developer A should be able to communicate to a developer B through code, through clean code, by writing so clean so that whatever he or she means could be easily interpreted by another developer just by looking at the code, even without relying on comments. We also should have probably a minimum amount of those. So code should be clean, crisp, clear, and to the point. And it's also dilutes another misunderstanding that, hey, the more code we write, the better. Quite the opposite. Fewer lines of code means cleaner code, easier to understand. And dovetails with this would be another guide from Large-Scale Scrum is integrating continuously. And this is not to be confused with having Jenkins integrated with Jira, right? This is a silly thing. We always remind of teams, just because you have Jenkins does not mean you have CI/CD pipeline. CI/CD is the behavior developers execute and demonstrate by committing very frequently to same code base, hopefully mainline head of trunk, as opposed to going off for days or weeks on local branches. So those are two main guides I would like to mention, and just in support of those, there are some experiments teams could run. Well, first, always try to produce a walking skeleton, tracer code that you can run, compile, and see if it works. This is something that should be possible for any developer, for any team.
Squeezes out a lot of technical risk, in my experience.
Exactly. Shorter increments, shorter bursts, right? Also avoid, as much as possible, the whole concept of architects handing over design to developers, and developers like masons lay bricks. Developers code without thinking about a product, about architecture. That's another experiment. Avoid doing that. Of course, if we have any technical leads, I better call them leaders if they're true leaders, they can actually teach during code reviews by leading by examples, as opposed to asking for status or for points completed or some other trivial nonsense. And of course, another experiment to run perhaps is to constantly raise awareness of negative impact of legacy code, which brings to my last point. Try to refactor as frequently as you can. So don't leave your code stale for a long time, because once it becomes stale and idle, bad things happen. So you have to exercise your code, just like you exercise your body. Now go ahead. I was going to pass it on.
But as I recall, these particular experiments are all in the first book, which is Practices for Scaling Lean and Agile Development. Is that correct?
That's about right. So it's fine. It's a good thing you reminded everyone at the beginning. So it's almost like a layered cake, or we call it the complete picture of large-scale Scrum, with principles and rules, and then guides and experiments. So these 4 experiments I just mentioned would be a way to validate and experiment with the guides that I also mentioned, the code communicating through code and integrating continuously. So it's all tightly interrelated, tightly coupled. What's your experience with the aforementioned? Have you dealt with teams of developers that maybe struggle with cleanness of code or anything along those lines?
Yes, I agree with everything you've said. And one of the most compelling, and everything that, to be fair, the boss and Craig have also said there. And one of the most compelling stories I can remember is I was working at a company where we had a large number of teams. We were not running in a LeSS structure. Each team had its own. Each 2 or 3 teams had their own backlog. I'm not saying that was a good thing. But that was the reality. And each team was. They were feature teams. We were working across all. We did have collaborative code ownership. We did touch any aspect of the code. And I was working on a team that was doing some work related to some international functionality, and it involved some cookie manipulation, which happened to be done in like an Apache. Maybe it was in Tomcat. It may have been on the Java side. That it was a handler way up in the food chain would handle some of the inbound requests and put some international context information in it so that we knew that this particular customer was from a certain country once we looked up their IP address and through a big, huge table. And we had to do some work in there. And we figured nobody touches that handler code. I mean, it hasn't been touched in ages, months and months and months. It's pretty stable. It's been there for several years. And even though we had 24 other teams, the odds of any other team touching that particular code in the span of a month or 2 were very low. And yet, that's exactly what happened. But because we were all working off the main line, in this case, trunk is a subversion world. Yeah, This wasn't CVS, it was subversion. We were working off subversion on trunk. And we had moved to feature toggles, so we were always in a shippable state. And we had good automated tests and all of this. And we were practicing continuous integration as a behavior, not just as a tool. And so, sure enough, we're checking in pretty regularly. Someone comes over to our team room and says, "Oh, you made a change that is in conflict with some stuff that we're doing," which was completely unrelated. And I don't even remember the details of what they're doing, and it's not important. What's important is we went to a whiteboard, and of course, I'm me, so I had put whiteboards all over this room. We had floor-to-ceiling whiteboards all over because I'm me. And we went to the whiteboard, and we worked out what the issues were between us. And within 30 minutes later, we had a workable solution, and we never stepped on each other's toes for the next several weeks as we did this work concurrently, because we figured out all that needed to happen was a conversation. But the only reason that we knew to have that conversation was because we were continuously integrating, because we were communicating in code. There is no way that I would have bothered everyone by sending out some blast email that says, "By the way, I'm going to touch this piece of code." Even if I had done so, no one would have read it. But because we were practicing continuous integration, because we were communicating in code, within less than a day, that conflict was noticed, the conversation happened, and we avoided what would otherwise have been, weeks of merge hell for somebody. Who is whoever gets in first. But it's this race. Whoever goes in last gets merge hell. But yeah, that's the best story I have for these concepts, and it really does work.
Yeah, so thank you for mentioning this. So I'm just, as you were speaking, I kind of thought, I was trying to improvise in my head. I was trying to play through my mind. What would happen if you did not work off of the same main line? What if every developer sat on his or her own local branch, swiftly coding just for themselves, without really, interacting with others and being happy, being very happy that, hey,
it's all working.
No conflict.
Right?
Everything is working, no bugs, no problems for day 1, day 2, day 3. And then at one point later on, they all try to merge. And obviously, there will be like 3-4 days of rollback transactions and reverse engineering and looking for problems. So it's not like you did not have an issue, but you had a small incremental issue of 30 minutes worth of resolving. And that's certainly economically.
Yes.
If people don't understand anything else, they understand economics, right? Money. Yeah. Time and money was saved by, not to mention aggravation and finger pointing, was saved by doing this continuously and constantly checking in and seeing, are we breaking anything, right?
And even at the team level, had we stayed on feature branches, even that wouldn't have been enough because they were completely unrelated features.
That's right. So let's just integrate continuously to the main line and actually see. But by the way, in the context of large-scale Scrum, and I'm thinking out loud again, if you got 2 to 8 teams working this way, just like you said, even if each team has its own dedicated feature branch for that team, that essentially creates 8 sources of truth. And if they don't integrate continuously and frequently, even within 5 hours, 6 hours of work, you can produce so much code that may potentially be not compatible. So CI/CD in large-scale Scrum becomes exponentially more important than even in BS, basic Scrum, right? Because there's so many more people coding.
Now, if we had less basics, so we only had 8 teams, it's likely that during sprint planning, some of this part 1 or part 2, this would have come out. Right? And you might have caught it that way. But at some point, but even that only scales so far. You get to less huge, there's no way the teams would know about it. Even if, they're running less, they're just not going to know about it because each requirement area is somewhat still, focused on their requirement area. The only thing that really scales is the engineering practices.
Oh yeah, that's a powerful statement. I agree. Yeah. Everything else should be descaled, right? So of scaling, scaling because we're huge. Well, that's not what you do. You actually descale, but you scale with the goodness that you have, which is engineering excellence. Go ahead.
Okay, so thanks again, people. It's always great to have you, and great to have you here, Gene.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise, it was great to connect these few guys with the experiments that we have well documented to your personal experience, James. Thanks for entertaining this.
You're very welcome. And for those who would like to see more of this, because we have such lovely mugs that you all want to look at us. We routinely post this on both my LinkedIn page or my LinkedIn profile, as well as Gene publishes on his LinkedIn profile. And we typically like each other's posts. Also, on the YouTube Agile Carpentry channel, you will find this content, which tends to be better for watching on a phone, because when you watch in landscape, it tends to work better. As would Adaptive Ecosystems YouTube channel, which is Gene's YouTube channel. He typically co-publishes there as well. And then if you're in your car or driving or whatever, this is available in podcast from most podcast forums. And if you're watching it on Spotify for the Agile Carpentry channel on Spotify, you can also see the video that way. So again, thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Excellent. Thank you very much.